Okay, folks, we're going to get started in just a few seconds. There's plenty of room still up in the front. If you haven't found a seat, nestle into your favorite chair and grab your cup of coffee because we have a great presentation today. So just wait a few more seconds. Okay, welcome everybody. It's again once a beautiful day, May 20th, 2020, and we are on the eve of Memorial Day weekend. Can you believe it? I can't believe it. And when I think back to when the pandemic first started, and I think about now, I could not have imagined then what's happened since then. There's been so many changes. And I think the big question in everyone's mind is, when are we going to get back to work, to our jobs, to our workplace, and what does re-entry look like? I am so glad that they opened up the golf courses a couple of weeks ago, but I am really looking forward to when everything sort of gets back to normal, although it probably will never fully get back to normal. So we have a great session today with two wonderful people who are going to talk about how to re-enter the workplace, what that looks like after the pandemic. Of course, this is our slide that tells you that the information we're presenting, as well as the folks that are on, is really just for general guidance. It doesn't constitute the provision of legal advice, tax advice, accounting services, investment advice, professional consulting of any kind. So you need to talk to your professional advisor and give them the pertinent facts relevant to your particular situation. But of course, we're here to be helpful and to answer your questions. So here's today's presenters. Of course, myself, Todd Polinack with Saks, my friend Timothy Greiner from JLL, who's the Executive Managing Director of the Retail Leasing Brokerage Group, and Randi Kochman with Cole Schotz. She's the chair of the Employment Law Department. And you can see there are their email addresses. If you have any specific questions after this presentation, feel free to email them. And also, we want you to know that this presentation is being recorded and will be sent out to everyone who registered in their email, and will also be posted in our COVID-19 Resource Center on our website. So with no further ado, I want to turn this over to Tim, who's going to tell us about re-entry, the re-entry framework, how the journey back into the workplace, and what that looks like. We don't know perfectly, but we have some thoughts, and Tim, take it away.
Todd, thank you. Tim Greiner. Just a quick correction. I didn't notice it on the other slide, but I'm run the office group, not retail. So please don't ask me any questions about when the stores are going to reopen. I want to take you through kind of a re-entry framework that our company put together to help us talk to our clients about the next steps and a journey that we're all going on. So the graphic you see here is really a timeline of kind of where we are, where we're going, and where we think we're heading. You know, it could also be JLL stock price, unfortunately, and a lot of other companies. But, you know, where we all started way back when, as Todd alluded, is the shock. And I remember being in my office back in late February, early March, and we were all supposed to go to Arizona on a big sales conference, get roughly 2,000 to 3,000 of our top producers around the country for a hotel, for golf, for education, for seminars, for a bit of a boondoggle. And that got canceled about a week before the trip because of the news coming out of Washington State that a nursing home had, that the spread of the coronavirus had spread to Washington State, to a nursing home. And we all thought at the time in our office, I wonder if we're going to go on this trip. I wonder. and everything was changing so rapidly. And then I got a call a week later from my chief operating officer, and she said, "Tim, I need you to just tell everybody that they should go home and prepare to go home for a while." So I walked around the office in a state of shock and disbelief, and told everybody to kind of pack up their office as if they won't be back for at least a few weeks. And that was what we all thought at that point in time. And here we are 8 weeks later, trying to figure out when we can get back into the office. And we've gotten past that shock. We're in the realization phase, and we've all responded. I think the workforce, at least at our own company, we've got 100 offices around the country and 80,000 employees around the globe, have all responded and adapted really well to working from home. But at the same time, I think from our own internal surveys and from the clients we spoke to, we're all itching to get back to work, to be with our colleagues, and we're having various success working from home. There's lots of distractions, and some of us are just not set up. Our companies, we're not geared up. We did not have workplace continuity plans in place. For a lot of our clients, we're not set up. Fortunately for us, everybody had a laptop. We're all on the cloud. So we were able to work fairly seamlessly from home. But our plan is to get back in the office and to do so in a really thoughtful, phased approach. So what I'll share with you today is some information we've heard from our clients that really helped frame the deck. We've had lots of peer-to-peer calls with big banking institutions on the East Coast and big tech firms on the West Coast, and our own workplace strategy consultants to think about, how to get back to the office and what's a safe way to do so and productive way to do so. We've also learned a lot from our colleagues who are already back in the office. In fact, 3 weeks ago, we got a picture of our Wuhan, China office. Everybody in masks, but surprisingly arm in arm taking a picture in the reception office. So with that said, why don't we dive into the journey and what we're calling the reentry. We're really looking at 3 pillars for reentry. The first is how to reactivate your space. The second is that we have to respect the health and wellness of our employees. And third, how do we then revitalize the operations of our workplace and kick our culture back into gear that we've all spent a lot of time focused on. So before we kind of enter the workplace, there are 4 key factors that really are barriers to entry. One is government mandate. So we're all waiting in New Jersey in New York for the governors to kind of give us the green light and when we can go back to work in our offices. And we're getting guidelines from the CDC. The information is almost coming at us at an extremely rapid pace. It's like drinking water from a fire hose. But the first thing we have to clear as a barrier to entry is will the government let us? And then second thing we're advising our clients, our tenants to do is to make sure that the landlord or the owner of the building has a actionable plan. And we're not saying what exactly that plan has to be. We do have a checklist that we are giving our clients to ask their landlords, and we're advising our landlords on some of the things they should be doing, and we'll touch on them in a bit. But probably the biggest one is what are cleaning protocols, what are the access, but knowing that your landlord has a plan and is effectively working towards executing that plan. And I could tell you that we hosted a landlord call 2 weeks ago with about a dozen prominent local New Jersey landlords, and they were all pulling their hair out. I think the constant theme was every building's different. Every building's got different tenant base and a different geography. We had national institutional owners and local developers, and everybody was struggling with pulling together a cohesive plan and one that was customized to their tenants and each specific building they owned. The third thing is what is your plan as a tenant, as an occupier? Do you have the protective gear in place, the mask, the hand sanitizer? How are you going to re-enter? And we'll spend a lot of detail on number 3 in the rest of this deck. And then, all of it revolves around considerations for the employee. I think all of us who work in an office environment know that culture is key. Happy employees are key. You can't have happy customers without happy employees. So And right now, most of our employees are extremely focused. They're on their health and wellness and are concerned about their health and wellness. So those are kind of the barriers to entry before you can even start thinking about reactivating space. So when we think about getting back to the office, and I can share with you what our near-term plan is for JLL. We've set a target date. We've got 5 New Jersey offices, the biggest of which is in Parsippany, New Jersey. And our plan for all 5 of those offices, we set a target date of June 22nd, assuming we meet the 4 barriers to entry, and we're talking to all 5 of our landlords to make sure they have a plan. And what we're going to do is go back with roughly 25% of our workforce, and we're going to go back slowly. We're going to allow people to work from home who feel safer working from home, who are in no rush to go back to work. I did talk to one of my New York colleagues who runs the New York office, and he said that they're going to allow people to work from home through the end of the year if they're A-list players and they're productive, but it's not going to be indefinitely. So the other thing we're going to be doing is we've surveyed our folks to see who wants to get back to work. We're a very mobile workforce, so it's some of our folks are in the Morristown office one day, a Rutherford office the next, at a client's office the following day. We're asking them to pick a office and not be so mobile. And if they pick an office, do they want to go back in this first phase? Our overwhelming response was 70% of the staff do want to get back and do want to get back to the office. So what we're doing is we're trying to figure out who is more essential, and we're trying to break into shifts. So we're probably going to do a weekly shift. And the reason for that, instead of doing, say, Monday, Wednesday, Friday shift or a Tuesday, Thursday shift, is, first of all, nobody wants to work Monday, Friday. So getting people to volunteer for those days will be impossible in the summer. But the real reason is cleaning. If somebody were to be sick or show symptoms, even if it's not COVID-19, we're going to enact a cleaning protocol of our space, what we're calling a deep clean, which means a significant disinfection and wipe down of surfaces. And that's harder to do on a Monday night, knowing that people were coming back Tuesday, or if we find out on a Thursday that somebody got sick on a Monday, we've now possibly infected our whole office. So again, it's a slow shift back to work, 25% key essential employees, and we're probably doing it in shifts. The other thing we're going to do is just try and communicate new behaviors around the office, which I mentioned around mobility. We are not going to do significant office reconfigurations. We've got a lot of clients who are mid-construction. There's a biotech firm in Princeton who is probably 30 days away from finishing their space. And they met with their architect, who's a national architect, 30 days ago with my colleague and the head of real estate. And the advice was, don't spend a ton of capital reconfiguring your space. Instead, use work from home, use shift work until we figure out where things end up. Our advice to clients is to not change course and change direction dramatically on your workplace. But what that means is, and you can see in the graphic, is that making sure that people are properly spaced out due to social distancing guidelines, that your conference room, simple things the architects are advising us on, is pull conference room chairs out of your conference room. Make sure your AV equipment's set up. Take down that Keurig container that gets touched 1,000 times a day. And make sure start applying kind of materials on high touch areas so that they are will help stop the spread of any potential infection. That's generally what we're doing to activate the space. I'm not looking forward to going back wearing a mask, but we'll do so. I think it's the right thing to do. And if you're not wearing a mask under our own JLL protocols, we're not going to let you stay in the office if you don't practice kind of the guidelines. The other thing that's interesting is how we deal with kind of common areas, and that's where the landlord comes in also. So, how are they going to be dealing with common area spaces like gyms and fitness centers, cafeterias? But all of it revolves around the respecting health and wellness. So all these decisions are about making sure our employees feel safe and want to come back to work, because a fearful employee who's forced back to work is somebody who's not going to be all that productive. And in fact, we heard recently of a couple companies that were essential businesses where people have been working from home, where their executives have mandated come back to work. We'll see how that plays out. I'm sure there's a bunch of unhappy employees in that firm. But here are some of the owner investor considerations that I mentioned earlier. Again, common area spaces. A big question is around HVAC, added filtration. I think more modern buildings that have been enhanced with more modern HVAC systems typically have better filtration. They also introduce more fresh air into the environment. If you ever asked a HVAC mechanical engineer to really tell you how your air is distributed throughout your office space, for most of us, the air is cooled and then sent back into the office space and then distributed back to the HVAC system and then distributed back into the office space after it's cleared. It's only more modern HVAC systems that really have heavy filtration and have systems that actually pull fresh air from the environment. So, and a lot of our buildings in New Jersey are particularly old, ranging from 30 to 40 years old. So HVAC is a real critical component to ask your landlord how they're handling it. And then we're seeing some owners actually focus on new designations. We probably have all heard of LEED certification, which was around environmental sustainability. The new standard is what's called WELL, or Well Fit. And we're actually helping a developer retrofit an asset in Morristown, New Jersey. We were fortunate to sign a lease with CIT, who's moving in probably the end of this year, barring any more construction delays. And the other half of the building is vacant. So we are really making sure that that building, because of its current status, and it was ripped down to its steel and brand new curtain wall, brand new HVAC, brand new everything else, is that we're going to pivot and probably get a designation that's called Fitwell, that's actually designated by the CDC, that claims and establishes your building as a healthy building. And it takes into account not just the mechanical systems of the asset, but also, are you looking at things like health and nutrition in your cafeteria? So I think healthy buildings will be a trend you see in the very near term. And it's not a real heavy lift for owners to consider getting their buildings designated. One of the big things we have to look at is visitor protocol, particularly on owners. I have a client who owns the Gateway Center in Newark, New Jersey, and it's a high trafficked area. Thousands of commuters use that Gateway Center to commute every day, and they own 3 of the 4 buildings and control all the retail and all the parking around the Gateway Center. And they are spending a lot of time figuring out how to get people in and out of that building. Will they block off access for visitors, for commuters? Will they force commuters to walk outside? It's all these things they have to deal with right now around visitor protocol. One of the big things is health screening. And the advice from our property management lead, who also, fortunately for us, happens to run BOMA, New Jersey, her name's Dana Getz. The advice from BOMA, from this trade association, is that landlords should shy away from thermal screening. You know, how they respond to somebody who does get tagged as having an elevated temperature, it just involves a whole slew of privacy concerns. And now you're asking, you know, traditional security and property management staff to almost act as enforcement agents and nurses. It puts the landlord in a bit of a predicament from a liability standpoint and just from an operational standpoint. So we're advising our clients not to do thermal screenings if they're landlords. If clients and tenants want to do thermal screenings, they can do them in their own office. We are not doing so at JLL. We just felt like we're going to ask our employees to be mindful of their own health and wellness and not show up if they've got a sniffle. The other thing that's been tricky is getting protective equipment. Hand sanitizer is in short supply, as we all know, and protective masks. We're making sure that for every employee, they've got 2 masks. And the other tricky thing is, how do you dispose and wash all those masks? So it'll be interesting to see how our firm kind of plays through that. Some of the other issues related to workplace and operations, one of the big ones is elevators. So think of, a vertical transportation. Your office is on the 20th floor of a not even a high rise, kind of a mid-rise office building in downtown Jersey City or Newark or Manhattan. How are you getting in and out of that elevator? A lot of our clients are putting in elevator concierge, and you're going to ride one at a time, and they're going to encourage tenants who are on lower floors to walk. One of the newer elevator designs is something called destination dispatch, which involves no touching of any elevator buttons. It'll take you right to your floor, which means you're not stopping on intermediary floors and allowing people to get on and off. I think you're going to see a high growth in that technology. I know of only a handful of buildings in all of New Jersey that have put that technology in their assets. There's 2 in Newark and 1 in Jersey City in a multi-tenant office building. So we've actually done some studies for clients to show how long it would take. If you were to queue up in the lobby, the line would actually stretch out the door, and by the time you actually got to your space and you got through your line, it might be time to turn around and go home. That's how long it would take to get all the population in a high dense environment building vertically safe into a building. So elevators are a big challenge clients are dealing with right now. There's really no great solution. Some of them are, monitoring, managing, and setting designated times to use the elevator. One of my colleagues went back to our office in Parsippany, and he called me afterwards. He said, "Tim, the office looks like a zombie apocalypse." I can only imagine 8 weeks of nobody going in, dusting, cleaning. I think we had 1 deep clean early on in this process. He said all the plants are dead. So I laughed, and you don't think about this, but your vendors, you got to look at your vendors who service your space, whether it's pest control, plant maintenance, coffee, cleaning, and are those vendors equipped? Are they equipped to continue doing their job? Or do they have their own screening and health and wellness measures put in place before you let them into your space? And then the other thing we're looking at is kind of long-term continuity planning for buildings, and how do we maintain safe operations? I'm not going to go through all of these, but you get the sense that there's a lot to consider for landlords and tenants as they get back to reoccupancy and into the next normal. One of the big things, though, is cleaning. Landlords are going to see enhanced labor costs or increased labor costs. So everybody's operating expenses in a multi-tenant building will go up over the next year or 2, and tenants are going to be forced to pay for those increases. And then the cleaning within your own space, you're also going to have probably those costs passed on to you as well. So understanding cleaning protocols, most landlords are giving a menu of options. One other kind of interesting thing is data collection. We've got a tool that our company uses called Utilization IQ, and it's a data monitoring tool. It's sensors, it's consultants who monitor sensors, who install them in light fixtures and in your space. And we've used them traditionally to understand how people use their space. So if a company asked us to help them understand how efficiently they use space, we would typically go in, install these sensors, have a consultant read the sensors, monitor utilization of space, access, who's using conference rooms, who's at their desk, who's not, how often they're there, and come up with an efficiency study. So historically, we'd come back and tell a company, you're using space 70 to 80% of the time. And we use those sensors and that data to help a company shrink its workplace. Maybe they would go to what we call a mobility solution, where companies would share desks, employees would share desks, and it would help them reduce their operating costs and run rate on real estate because they could shrink their space by roughly 20%. We're now switching the utilization of that technology as more of a health and wellness monitoring system. So a big company who has, say, 8 floors in a building, and the real estate director is sitting in Arkansas, and this space is sitting in New York, how are they monitoring the utilization of that space? And in this case, making sure that it's not too densely occupied, that we don't have people sitting at desks face to face less than 6 feet together. So we have actually got this technology that can help companies turn that tool into a health and monitoring tool. And we're actually getting a lot of good feedback from some of our bigger clients in using that tool. One of the things that we've learned from both our Asia and European colleagues, I was on the phone with the CEO of our European region last week, and most of Europe is reopened. Germany, Italy, they're back at work. Germany, it's been a little over 3 weeks now, and one thing that was interesting for me to hear was when they first reopened, they did all the protective provisioning, they had the hand sanitizer, but what they didn't think about was how do you activate the culture of your office when people are being used to work from home, that they have the flexibility that they had, and when they come back and they only find 25% of their colleagues in the office and everybody's spread out wearing masks, it's not a real fun place to work. And what he said is you really have to focus on recreating that culture, that environment, do some things that will help keep people wanting to come back to the office. Because what happened was, in many of our offices around Europe, people came, they weren't happy with the environment, decided they would work from home more often than they should. So what they started doing was making sure food was ordered in, that they had team meetings, that they communicated regularly. If you think about how often we're communicating with our team from home these days, when we go back to work, we can't go back to doing things the old way. We have to think about how we can continue to grow that culture. And our own culture, I could tell you, is, we help drive culture, often with food and beverage. It's fairly often that when we were in the office that we'd have what we call culture club events with wine and beer and good food fairly frequently. So how do you do that when you've got to practice these social distancing guidelines? It's, I thought, a really interesting lesson learned. So now I want to pivot to where we think the office market's going. And I could tell you, nobody knows. There are, I think, several factors that may impact the increased supply of space in the market. And there's also some factors that may drive demand in New Jersey. Frankly, I've read a bunch of articles lately that New Yorkers are fleeing Manhattan, both residential and office space. But I could tell you, we're just not seeing that trend yet on the office side. And I've been in fairly frequent dialogue with our New York, Long Island, Connecticut, Westchester offices about traction for companies potentially seeking space in the suburbs. But there's a couple factors at play. One is what we're calling de-densification, and that is, instead of companies shrinking their footprint and putting more people in less and less space, becoming really super efficient in how they use space, we've been trending from historical averages of 250 square feet per person, squeezing people down to 150 to 175 square feet per person. And with these social distancing guidelines, putting people in bench seating, arm in arm next to each other, sharing desks so that, maybe you're using it Monday and Thursday and somebody else is using it the rest of the week. We're going to see a trend away from that, especially in the near term. So where you've got seating capacity for 100, you might only have 50 people sitting in that area, which means companies will need to spread out in the near term. At the same time, the offsetting factor will be work from home productivity. We've heard from companies like Twitter, Morgan Stanley announced that they don't know if they need offices or more offices. And I think what they're seeing is a fairly high productivity gain and engagement of people working from home. In fact, I'm in the middle of a lease renewal in Arkansas with a company whose lease is up in 18 months. We've been working on this deal for a year, trying to figure out how much space they need to keep. We were going to renew 8 floors of space. We're now thinking about only renewing 5 floors, so 5/8 of their original space plan, and they were already super efficient. And what the real estate folks told me is that they found their employees are really well engaged and really productive from home. And my comeback to her was, we all seem really engaged and really focused because there's really nothing else to do. I'm sitting at my desk, looking out my window, staring at my laptop all day long. And if somebody pings me, I can get right back to them. That's not going to be the case when I'm back visiting clients, when I'm going from office to office, when I'm maybe able to do some client entertainment on the golf course. All those things are going to change. So I think what we're going to see for the office market is kind of those two factors fighting against each other, and probably playing alongside each other, and probably see a status quo in terms of needs. Most of our clients who have leases coming up soon are making shorter term decisions and looking for flexibility. So that's been our advice, is to kind of wait this out and see where the dust settles before you make long-term capital commitments in this environment. That's all I had. So Randy, Todd, I'll turn it back to you. If anybody, I think the deck is coming out, but we do have a link to all of JLL's research. It's in the deck, and you can always feel free to call me or email with any questions.
Hey, Tim, thank you so much for that presentation. It's very helpful. And we're all looking forward to this journey back into the workplace. That the tips were great. At this time, I'm going to hand it over to Randy, who's going to talk about all the different employment issues that we're going to face in reentry. Take it away, Randy.
Okay, awesome. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Todd. Thank you, Tim. That was great. My name is Randi Kochman, and I'm an employment attorney. That's all I do. So it's been an interesting time to be an employment attorney, and I'm pleased to be here. Hopefully, I can help in some way. And as Tim mentioned, one huge part of all of this is your employees. We are our employees. And there's a lot of anxiety out there from everyone has a different experience. Everyone's coming at this in a different way. And so what I'm going to focus on in my time is the main concerns that employers have with employee reentry, and of course the legal landscape that goes with all of this. Trying to move my slide. So okay, it's not moving. So the 4 areas that I plan to speak about, there we go, are right here on you can see it on the slide. So employer concerns and issues to consider are basically fourfold, and you can't turn on the news without seeing issues about employee concern, what they can do, what they can't do, everyone on unemployment. In March, all the calls were about furloughs and terminations and people getting sick. The last few weeks, the calls from my clients and employers of all sizes in the tri-state area asking about how do I remobilize and what can and can't I do. And I guess that's a good thing. But it's going to be a little thorny as we move forward. So I want to leave you with some tips on how to navigate all of that. So the first area I'm going to cover is obviously ensuring employee safety. It all starts from there. Tim obviously spoke about the workplace and all the things that need to be considered. It's a lot, and I'm gonna speak about the legal issues. The second is reasonable accommodation request. This point right here, I believe, is going to be the bear. This is going to be the challenge for every employer out there, regardless of your size. Every employee is different, and a reasonable accommodation by its definition is an individualized analysis. And so my main theme today is that it's very hard to have uniform rules in this environment. Every employee will have to be considered separately, and I'll go into that in a little bit. Maintaining employee privacy and health and medical information, and avoiding claims of discrimination as you remobilize. So the backdrop of my remarks is the EEOC. I don't know who's heard of it, but it's the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. It's a federal agency, EEOC for short, and their mission is to ensure the lack of discrimination in the workplace. They govern the Americans with Disabilities Act, Title VII, which is a non-discrimination law, the age discrimination in employment law. But in this context, we're really talking about the Americans with Disabilities Act. And the law basically balances employee rights to be accommodated if they have a disability, to maintain confidentiality in their information on the one hand, and employer rights to have a workforce that can perform work. And there's a tension. And so back in 2009, the EEOC came out with a pandemic preparedness guide, and you can find it online very easily. And it really didn't gain much traction. That was when H1N1 was around. But it was out there, and they kind of put it on the shelf after that. And since March, they kind of brushed it off. And just to show you how the guidance is changing and they're struggling with things, it's been modified 6 times since March, most recently on May 7th. And there are nearly 100 FAQs out there about these laws. So just the point of that is that it's a work in progress, and it's on May 5th, they issued some guidance. It was met with confusion by the public, and so they modified it two days later. So this is just, I hate the word unprecedented really, because it's what we hear every single day, 10 times a day, but I'm not really sure what else to say. In this context, this is unprecedented to have so much guidance on an almost daily basis from the government, and that's just a reflection of where we are. So legally, the pandemic, the COVID was declared a pandemic in early March, and that means that it has met the direct threat standard under the ADA. Usually, without a direct threat, employers are limited in the type of questions they can ask employees, the kind of doctor's notes they can require, testing. There are all kinds of restrictions because, as I said before, there's this tension between employer and employee rights here. Because we are dealing with a pandemic, by definition, it meets the direct threat standard, and it gives employers more leeway. A direct threat is a significant risk of substantial harm to the health or safety of the employee or others that cannot be eliminated or reduced by a reasonable accommodation. So if you have an employee who's a direct threat to others, you have rights to keep that employee out of the workplace, to test that employee. Now that doesn't, in a non-pandemic situation, it doesn't come up that often, but here we're all potential threats. And therefore, legally, you as an employer, if you're bringing employees back to the workplace, you should think about how you're doing it vis-a-vis employee safety. Are you asking employees about symptoms? You should be. Do you have some kind of either communicable illness guide, policy, a COVID protocol that reminds everybody these are the symptoms? If you have any of these symptoms, do not come in. If you experience those symptoms while you are in, go home, tell HR, all the rules that go about it, all the hygiene, the protocol that people should be following, the masks, are they wearing masks in common places? Of course, the elevators, all of that. This needs to be communicated to your employees so that you can keep everyone safe. You have the right to, if you know an employee has had COVID or a direct family member has had it or has had symptoms, you can require a note, either a negative test and or a note and or a period of time when they're symptom free. So these are all things you can require, and you should be working this out and applying it in an even-handed way, whatever your protocol is. You can take temperatures. I mean, we're seeing this all over the news. The courthouses, we know, when I go to court in June or July, whenever it is, it won't be June or July when they open, temperatures will be taken. They also have thermoscanning, they've told us. I'm sure there's going to be other places with that. As an employer, Are you going to be taking temperatures? I have clients who are doing that now, the essential clients that have factories. They've been doing it for a long time. My advice there is to, you don't just pull out a thermometer and take temperatures. You need to work it out with a healthcare provider, figure out if you're going to hire a third party, and or if you're going to do it yourself, do training. Because while it's allowed, it must be done in a reliable and trustworthy way. One note on, and a point here too, for those, as I mentioned before, my remarks are really kind of geared to New York and New Jersey, both of which states don't have requirements for temperature taking, but this is an area where we all know the states vary on COVID response. So if you happen to be in another jurisdiction, you know, there could be state laws that differ on this. The new law and the declaration of this as a pandemic has allowed employers a little more leeway when it comes to applicants. So you are allowed to delay the start date for someone who has COVID. And if for some reason, whatever job you've made an offer requires that the employee start immediately and they can't because of COVID, you can withdraw the offer. So the point is you have a little more leeway when it comes to how you deal with your employees and applicants. Confidentiality, that's been a rule from the beginning. For anyone who had an employee get sick in the workplace, you know there's a way to deal with that. I'm just changing my slide. There we go. Okay, so you can, all of these records are confidential. An employee who gets sick, an employee who gives a doctor note, all confidential. If you decide to take temperature screening when people come back, those records, those logs, all confidential medical records, they must be maintained separately from the rest of the personnel files. If an employee gets sick at the workplace and is diagnosed with COVID, some people went through this before everyone went home. You as an employer have contact tracing obligations. So you call your local health department, they help you through it. You should be trying to keep logs of who's in contact with who, so it makes it easier when you have to notify others that they've been in close contact with a COVID positive individual. That gets to Tim's point about staggering your return, 25%, not letting people change offices. It helps with that contact tracing if you need it. But all of those records are confidential, and one of the biggest, most common questions I get is, do you tell that person's name? No, you do not. You go to an employee and say, you've been in contact with an employee who's tested positive, or it could be a client or a customer or a contact. You do not disclose that person's name. In small environments, it's possible that the person, they'll figure it out, but as an employer, you do not disclose the name. The two exceptions are that where a temporary staffing agency finds out they have placed an employee with an employer who's COVID positive, they are allowed to disclose that employee's name to the employer. And the second exception is if you're calling public health, local or state department, you can use the name at that point. Okay, so now we're on the reasonable accommodation slide, which I promised was the thorniest area, and it will be. So again, under the ADA, employers have an obligation to reasonably accommodate employees or applicants who have a disability. And a disability is, under federal law, something that interferes with your ability to do a major life activity. It's not just everything, it's not a cold, it has to interfere with your normal living. It's not clear that COVID is a disability. The law has said we don't know, the EEOC and others, but for purposes of dealing with this pandemic, the reasonable accommodation obligations apply. And for all the employers out there, you've done reasonable accommodation analyses, whether you know it or not. Anytime you have an employee who needs an adjusted schedule, that's what you're doing. If you have a person who needs regular treatment every Thursday morning and you move their schedule back, that's a reasonable accommodation. Buying a piece of equipment for someone who needs help, is hard of hearing, or maybe has some vision issues and needs some help with their technology, that's a reasonable accommodation. A leave of absence is a reasonable accommodation. So all of these things, the government is saying, keep doing it. You know, you have this obligation. And in the COVID world, in all these paperwork that we've reviewing since March, they're giving examples. So for our essential employers that have been working this whole time, you know, when you go to the grocery store and you see plexiglass or one-way directionals, those are reasonable accommodations. Employees wearing masks and gloves given by their employers, those are reasonable accommodations. So basically, the way I look at this analysis is we are having already, and we will continue to have different categories of employees. And as you reopen, the employers, you will all get calls and have to deal with these different groups. The first are those who have had COVID or have symptoms of COVID. That's pretty easy. Those employees, getting back to the first point about keeping everyone safe, they stay home. You follow whatever the CDC protocol is, whether it's 14 days, I know it changes, and whatever the protocol is for when they can come back. Do they need a negative test? What's the availability of testing? Do they need to be asymptomatic for a period of time? You are accommodating those people by either letting them work from home if they're able to, or just giving them a leave of absence. So that's pretty easy. A subject for a different day is, because I could speak for hours on this, are all the benefits that those employees are entitled to, whether it's paid sick leave. You know, maybe 7 to 10 laws have passed in this area just since March. The Federal Families Coronavirus Response Act, which provides benefits through the end of this year. I'll touch on that in a minute. But I'm putting that aside. Keep in mind that any employee who is on some kind of leave is entitled to some kind of benefit, and there's quite a puzzle in figuring out which benefit applies or benefits in a particular situation. Okay, at-risk employees. These two middle bullets are really the difficult areas. So the at-risk employees are all those people from the CDC website who are, you know, they say over 65, anyone who's immunocompromised, pregnant, whatever it may be. And the May 7th guidance came out and specifically said to employers, and a lot of employers have this instinct, okay, I have employees who are over 65, I'm going to have them stay home. Meaning well, you know, they're at risk, I'll just have them stay home. No. That is not the employer decision to make. It must be, maybe that is what happens with that employee. Maybe they want to stay home, maybe they have a job that allows them to keep working at home, but you can't just make that unilateral decision. The law is that you must do the direct threat analysis, which I mentioned before, which is an analysis of what is this person's condition, what is this person's job, is the doctor saying, is this person coming back to the office, will that present a direct threat to the person or others? One interesting question I got was, we have an employee who's married to a prison guard, and the employer felt that that was a direct threat to the workplace, they don't want her back. Maybe, maybe not, but I said, you know, you can't just say you're married to a prison guard, you can't come back. You have to do this analysis. Are they a direct threat? And then the second part is, how do we accommodate that person? Maybe it's a separate shift. Maybe that person comes in when no one else is around. There's all kinds of things. Okay, but there's specific guidance on this issue because the EEOC felt that the public was confused. Finally, the fearful employee. This is going to be an area where some people, I've seen a lot with dental hygienists and, you know, people at risk, just say, I don't have a specific circumstances, maybe I don't fall within that at-risk group, but I'm just afraid. And can you say to them, I'm sorry, we're open, we're allowed to be open, come back, or you don't have a job anymore? Again, very individualized analysis. It depends on two key things. One is, what does the workplace look like? Under OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration Act, you have an obligation to provide a safe workplace, all the things Tim said. If you're the employer that's not doing that, you know, the employee may have a reasonable belief that they can't come back and be safe, and therefore they may have an OSHA claim, and that may be a reason to be fearful. The other thing is there an underlying disability, an anxiety, something mental health related that causes them to be fearful, or their condition has been exacerbated in this whole epidemic? And interestingly, the EEOC had a specific question on that. Who's, and telling employers you have to accommodate. I know I'm running short on time, so I'm going to wrap up quickly, but I just want to let you know I do have an eye on the time. The fourth category are employees with childcare needs. These are employees, we know schools are closed the rest of the year. You're going to have employees who can't come in even if you do reopen before the end of June because they have young children. Just to mention that that is covered by the FFCRA that I mentioned earlier. And by the way, summer camp is included in that need. So as we move into the summer, if camps are canceled, people may be covered as well. Okay, another question I'm getting, two other issues I just want to touch on. Employer liability for illnesses contracted at the workplace. We've gotten a lot of employers who are concerned about that. I bring people back and someone gets sick, am I liable? It's a little bit of a complicated question. Again, it may depend on your state. We're already seeing a couple cases. A meatpacking employee who passed away, his estate brought a claim in Pennsylvania that the plant really just had no safety protocols in March, and as a result, the employee died. And there's also a case in Illinois against Walmart, basically same theory. Usually, employee injuries are covered by workers' compensation. States differ in the exceptions to that, but generally you have to show some kind of intentionality that, the employer just disregarded the rules, no PPE, things like that. So it's possible. My guidance on that is to make sure you're following all those rules so you can say you did everything according to the book. And the other legal issue is the employee will have to show that they contracted the illness at work, which may not be that easy with what we know about the disease. My final point is discrimination. For those of you who had employers who laid off a lot of people and maybe can't just turn on the switch and bring everyone back at once, you do want to be careful about how you bring people back. For example, you don't want to just say, again, all the over 65 stay home, we're helping you. You could just walk yourself into an age discrimination claim. And finally, groups of people from certain parts of the world, national origin, religion, the EEOC has reminded everyone that, those rules apply as well. We can't take misconceptions about where this disease came from and say we're not going to have people come in from certain countries. That's another discrimination minefield. So I know that was a lot, and I speak quickly, but hopefully I've given you some thoughts. The main message to sum up is, as you're bringing your employees back, please be fearful and careful that you don't just apply a one-size-fits-all type of policy and procedure when you bring them back, and be very careful in how you respond to employees who have special needs as we all return. Thank you.
Okay, folks, so I'm going to take it back. And I think we have some questions. We have a few minutes for some questions and answers. So, all right, I've got one for Tim. Question, Tim, is what if the company or my company does not want to go back to working in an office environment? How would I actually get out of my lease?
It's an interesting question. First of all, every lease is different. Not unlike every employee, as Randy mentioned, is different. So it's a case-by-case basis. And I would think that you need to really review your lease, look at your options. I've got several clients who have thought about not going back to work, and we actually are putting their space in the sublease market. It's very hard to actually breach a lease. The default provisions are usually written in a landlord's favor. And when you do default, you're going to lose any kind of rights and that you do have under that lease. Some leases have personal liability. None of my clients have personal liability, but they do have corporate liability or loss of letter of credit or cash security deposits. But New Jersey law typically, and I'm not an attorney, it's not legal advice, but will accelerate all of your payments due. And if you got a judgment of default against you as a tenant, you could be liable for all those rents minus what the judge or court deems the landlord could replace your revenue with. So it's very hard to actually breach a lease. Some leases have termination rights. Some leases might actually be below market if they were signed a long time ago. And a landlord might be willing to negotiate a buyout of that lease. Or you can mutually work together with your landlord to find a replacement tenant to offset kind of your remaining obligation. So it's not an easy answer, but definitely one we're looking at for a lot of our clients.
Hey, thank you, Tim. So a question now for Randi. Randi, I think you touched on this, but maybe you can elaborate a little bit more. Do I have to take employees' temperatures or require them to wear masks or things like that upon reopening? Do I have to do that?
Okay, you don't, in New York and New Jersey, you do not have to take temperatures. Other jurisdictions you do. Right now, you don't. You do have to do whatever individualized assessment you believe, depending on your workplace, you need to do to make employees safe. So, for example, if you have employees side near each other in a manufacturing line, yes, they should be wearing masks. If they should be trying to social distance. Every employer is going to have to make some of those individualized assessments. There's no one size fits all. They're going to have to say, okay, a mask is appropriate in a common space where you may come up upon somebody, but if you're sitting in your office alone and you have a door, then you don't have to wear a mask. So you have to really give some thought to what it will look like in your particular space. And obviously every space is different. But there's no, to answer the question, there's no law that says you must do A, B, and C in terms of PPE and masks like in the public.
Thanks, Randi. One last question for Tim. Tim, the question is, who's actually responsible for the additional cleaning that will need to be done within my space and the building? Whose responsibility is that?
It's a good question, and one we field on a lot of, Todd. The lease dictates, right? Most leases, office leases in a multi-tenant office building, if it's not multi-tenant, it's your own building, you're clearly responsible. But in a multi-tenant office building, you've got cleaning specifications that are pretty generic. Most landlords' cleaning specs don't really involve wiping down surfaces. They don't include cleaning glass on office fronts. They are kind of like I'm not even sure they vacuum in our space. I think they use one of those old school vacuum rollers, and they dust and they empty the garbage waste baskets. That's clearly not enough cleaning to disinfect an office space, particularly one where an infections happen. So your lease will dictate what the landlord has to do to your space. And the lease will probably say something vague like they'll maintain the common areas in a Class A manner. So there's two aspects to cleaning. One is what goes on in your own space, and anything above and beyond your cleaning specs, the landlord's going to ask you to pay for. So if you want a deep clean and you want it done every other week or once a week, they're probably going to give you a menu of services, and you're going to pay for it for their landlord's cleaning company to do the work. And then for common area, the enhanced or increased cleaning that the landlord's going to be doing, because there will be more labor or more cleaning, more frequency of cleaning and increased scope, that'll fall into your operating expenses. And depending upon when your base year for operating expenses in your lease, that'll dictate how big of an increase, if any, you'll see in the cost.
Great. Thanks, Tim. So folks, we're getting close to the end of our time, so we're going to wrap it up here. Thank you so much, Tim and Randy, for all that information. Just a quick announcement, our upcoming webinar, which is tomorrow at 10 a.m. We do a weekly recovery update, COVID-19 loan options and forgiveness strategies. And if you have any additional questions besides emailing directly the folks who were the presenters today, you can email us at covid19@sacsllp.com. And we do have a resource center, and we will be sending out this presentation within 24 hours after it concludes. So thank you again, folks. Thanks, Randy. Thanks, Tim. Be safe out there and keep hope alive.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, Todd.
You're welcome, guys.
Take care.